All right, here we are a year out from the presidential election. Media is already calling it 1948 again, making President Obama the next Harry Truman. And I have to tell you, I have just read this book. It is an amazing, amazing book called, surprisingly, 1948. David Pietrusza is with us, and he wrote this book, 1948, Harry Truman's Improbable Victory, the year that transformed America. How are you, sir?
Good to see you again.
I have to tell you, I started reading it at lunch and couldn't be, I kept saying, I don't know, this a couple of weeks ago, I'm reading it and somebody keeps knocking on my door and I'm like, another 5 minutes, another 5 minutes. Really, really good. Well written and full of stuff. It's like when I looked in the progressive era in Woodrow Wilson, that you're just not taught.
This is a second progressive era.
Yeah. And this one was, Woodrow Wilson was much more obvious, I think. And everybody was for it. This is the year of the communist trials and everything else. Set the stage.
Harry Truman is President of the United States. He's come in after the death of Franklin Roosevelt. And there's a war for the soul of the Democratic Party going on. We're in a post-war America. This is, again, like my book 1920. We're coming out of the war. It's like, what are we going to be? And we're becoming a little more conservative, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And there's elements in the Democratic Party which certainly don't want it to be that way. They're very left-wing, and their champion is the former Vice President of the United States, Henry Wallace, very left-wing guy. Secretary of Agriculture under FDR. FDR makes him Vice President in 1940, but he's kind of a flake. And he's giving out with these pro-communist messages. They got to get him off the ticket in 1944. They put Harry Truman on. He stays on as Secretary of Commerce. Truman fires him because he's the only Secretary of Commerce with his own foreign policy, which is decidedly pro-Stalin. By 1948, there's a new party in the works called the Progressive Party. And that party is out to punish Harry Truman for being mean to Uncle Joe Stalin. And that party is not just left-wing, it is CPUSA, Communist Party United States of America, dominated.
This is really kind of, that part of it is really a play for the Democratic soul, which happened the last election. Nobody really saw it coming. But in the last election, 2008 or was it 6, where the party decided, and it was an internal battle. Which are we? Are we a Democrat, a liberal Democrat, or are we socialist Marxists?
Yeah, we're moving on. We're moving on from that sort of old guard Washington establishment. Sure. Hillary Clinton, her version of it's Bob Dole, it's their turn, and now we're going to ratchet it up. We're going to go faster and faster towards socialism, big government, and every other thing that we've resisted. Mm-hmm. But people thought for decades that Truman had won that battle, that the Truman wing of the party had won. And really what happened was the version domestically of the Long March, where Mao Zedong goes on a long march, he's on the run, he's hiding, he burrows down, and then all of a sudden he wins. He's got the mainland. The Henry Wallace wing of the Democratic Party pops up again with McGovern. George McGovern was a delegate to the 1948 Progressive Party Convention for Henry Wallace, and then full bloom it comes back again with the nomination of Barack Obama, and a Progressive Party activist that year in Chicago was Frank Marshall Davis, Obama's mentor in Hawaii.
Tell me the role that Frank Marshall Davis, this again, the mentor of the President of the United States, right. Correct. Tell me his role in 1948.
He'd been a booster of Henry Wallace back in 1944, obviously a supporter of the Wallace's civil rights program, very, very pro-integrationist in the South. And then he's backing, he has a newspaper, I believe it's called The Star in Chicago, and the Progressive Party buys out Frank Marshall Davis that year, enabling him to go to Hawaii on December 7th, 1948.
Which is,
we always go to Hawaii, right?
Of course, that's the day you want to go, December 7th, 1948.
That's when things are hopping.
Yeah.
So, and that is how history eventually becomes made. But there is the link to the Progressive Party, and McGovern certainly to that wing of the Democratic Party.
Okay.
And we see Occupy Wall Street this week or last week. Pete Seeger is serenading them. He was one of the great minstrels of the 1948 Progressive Party.
Isn't that interesting? Okay, so this is the year that Nixon shows up?
Hiss, because, again,
Alger Hiss.
so much happening with communism, with the Cold War. This is the year of the Cold War, the Berlin airlift, the reinstitution of the draft, the Marshall Plan, all of that. And the third wing of that is this communist in government issue.
Okay, so now how did Truman, because he, I believe, has a 32%?
That year, yeah.
That year?
Yeah.
32% approval rating.
Right.
Which I don't know of any president that has ever been that low and been reelected.
It's hard.
Yeah.
You've really got to blow it sky high,
Yeah.
and you can always count on the Republican Party to do that.
Which is why this was printed, this newspaper cover,
Exactly.
Dewey defeats, because no one expected Truman to win.
Right.
Okay, how did he do it? What happened?
What he does is, first off, he's blessed. Well, he's blessed by a number of things, and one of the old slogans is, we love him for the enemies he makes. So when he makes enemies in the South and he loses electoral votes there, this reassures the black vote in the North, which is more crucial to him. When he loses the Wallace people, he
Defined
gains...
by your enemies.
Yeah. When he loses the Wallace people, he gains the Catholic vote in the North. So that balances. But also, he's a feisty guy. He attacks the Congress, attacks the do-nothing Congress. Have we
Which
heard that
we're
recently?
hearing right now, yeah.
And you're going to hear more of it. Now, of course, back then, both houses were Republican. They had done some great things. They had supported him in the anti-communist measures against Stalin with the Marshall Plan, etc. He doesn't give them any credit. They fought the labor unions, the Taft-Hartley Act. They cut taxes. But this is not his measures. One of the things which is bothering the people is inflation. He talks about it, talks about it, talks about it, beats the Republicans over the head with it. This should be an issue for the Republicans this year. I think they're missing the boat.
Hang on. Here we have a piece of tape from Harry Truman at the convention. Watch.
I accept the nomination. My duty as president requires that I use every means within my power to get the laws the people need on matters of such importance and urgency. I am therefore calling this Congress back into session on the 26th of July.
Okay. Harry Truman is also the guy who helps found the State of Israel.
Absolutely.
He really pretty much stood alone.
In terms of against the people in his own State Department.
Right.
Now, there is support, even among Dewey, against Robert Taft. These people are supporters of Israel. Domestically, there is, I think, a consensus. But within the State Department hierarchy, among the wiser heads, or even James Forrestal, Secretary of Defense, he's opposed to it. George Marshall, Marshall Plan, respected guy by Truman, he's about ready to resign because they don't want us tilting toward Israel so much
And they
so
actually,
fast.
They actually sabotaged him, the State Department.
The State Department issues, Truman could be kind of loose sometimes with giving conflicting messages. And this is one thing where he is begged by his old haberdashery partner to meet with Chaim Weizmann, who is the head of the Zionists. He gives one message to Weizmann, and then the next day the ambassador to the United Nations gives exactly the opposite message. This is a major embarrassment for Truman. He loses support from the Jewish population in the country, is major league embarrassed. But what he does do is he stays consistently on policy for Israel all this way through. And he's fighting in this. He's fighting the Arabs because obviously they don't want it. And you see very early on where they are talking about a jihad against the West because we have recognized the State of Israel. And we are the first country to do this. And it's a question of partition or versus a unitary state. Now, I think it's been proven that a unitary state with a large Muslim population is a dicey thing. There's this thing called Lebanon to the north. There has been the moving of the populations out of Iraq. Even in the 40s and 50s, there were huge Jewish populations in North Africa, particularly Morocco. They had to go. It is not a pluralistic society. So the Jewish population, the Zionist population, decides we're going to close in our borders and have a secure state, because we've had some insecurity lately, like for the last 2,000 years, but also for that that was a hell of a last decade they had.
Have you ever read Mike Benson's book? I think it's The Founding of the State of Israel.
I've used that as part for this book, yes.
Did you really?
Yes.
It's a great book,
yes.
isn't it? Yeah. Stuff in there I had no idea about.
But
he was a very brave man when it came to Israel. When he made his mind, he moved forward.
He decided to do it, and they're warning right up to the end from the State Department, don't do it so precipitously. And what he does is he recognizes it 13 minutes into the founding of the State of Israel. And I think what this does is this is a morale booster, like your trip to Israel. And the fellow the businessman was on yesterday talking about how it inspired him there. I have to think that Truman's move, knowing that the big superpower in the world stood behind Israel at that point, when all of a sudden, when all the nations of the Arab League attacked on all sides, had to be a powerful thing for them to fight.
Well, that's one thing that Obama does not have in common with Harry Truman.
No.
And I think that's a big one. But who do you think Dewey is this time around? The guy who the Republicans you think are going to end up with and you don't think could win?
Well, it could be a northeastern governor with a moderate reputation. And that would have to be Mitt Romney, a very slick,
which is Dewey.
Which is Dewey, because I think Dewey he's very polished, he's very slick, on some levels he's very good, but he's poll-driven, he's like a weather vane. When it comes to the campaign, he refuses to take it to Truman. Foreign policy is off the table. Mistakes in negotiating access to Berlin are off the table. The Hiss case is off the table. So there are any number of things he will not take it to Truman on. He will not respond. He will not defend the Congress. And this is a terrible thing because the base is then demoralized. He ends up getting fewer votes. He ran for president once before in 1944 against Franklin Roosevelt. He ends up getting fewer votes in 1948 than he got in 44.
Wow, what a disaster.
Yeah. And it was all so very, very winnable.
Most important thing about 48 that people need to know for today.
It ain't over till it's over. Don't think because certain polls are, as they say, it's a snapshot in time, and it can roll against it, but also don't fight people who are very determined to hold on to power and to add to it with a campaign of mush and playing it safe.
I wish I had more confidence that the Republicans would actually listen to that, but I'm not sure that they do. I'm not sure that they have learned a darn thing since 1948. All right. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
Thank you. 1948. Fascinating book. You will learn more about a really important time period than you even... I mean, you've never learned any of this stuff in school. 1948, pick it up now. Back in a minute.